Hi, I'm Mireille. They said I was too quiet, too dramatic, too forgettable, but somehow they still remembered to wear my bracelet, to show my paintings, to use my words. Just not my name. They erased me from the will, told everyone I'd chosen to stay out of it, and when I almost drowned at the lake, they laughed. I thought silence kept the peace. Turns out it just helped them rewrite the story. What happens when the forgotten daughter stops staying quiet? What happens when the truth speaks for itself? By the time I pulled into the gravel drive, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the grass like long, patient fingers. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel. The house was already full of voices, familiar cadences of people I used to trust. I stepped out of the car, straightened my cardigan, and smoothed down my hair. No one came to greet me, not a glance from the porch. Verena stood center stage in her sleeveless linen dress, wine glass in one hand, gesturing with the other as if she were hosting a fundraiser, not a family barbecue. When her eyes met mine, she gave a short nod, half welcome, half warning. "Oh, Mireille, you made it," she said, like she hadn't noticed the RSVP I sent 3 weeks ago. "Would have been strange to miss it," I replied softly, clutching the tote bag tighter against my side. I walked past them, past the flickering tiki torches, and made my way toward the lake's edge. The dock creaked under my feet. I could still smell the oil stain I helped Dad apply to the wood a year before he passed. That scent had faded now, replaced by overcooked meat and citronella. I heard my nephew laugh about some joke I didn't catch. Someone opened a bottle with a pop. My mother's voice floated in the air, praising Verena's gala plans. No one asked where I'd been. No one asked how the house was holding up, or if I'd needed help fixing the leaking roof last winter. I stayed quiet. That was my role. Silent, safe, invisible. The grill flared up. Garrick's laugh bellowed across the yard. A cousin I hadn't seen in 5 years asked where I was working now. Before I could answer, Verena spoke over me. "She's doing something quiet, library work or artist in retreat or something. You know how she likes her space." I smiled. I didn't correct her. Later, Verena called out across the dock, "Let's see if the quiet one still knows how to swim." I turned in time to see her striding toward me, barefoot and smug. My heart skipped. "Verena?" I barely got the word out before her hands shoved my back. Hard. I hit the water sideways, breath torn from my lungs. Cold swallowed me whole. I kicked, panicked. My foot caught on something near the dock post. My chest burned. I surfaced once, just enough to gasp, and that's when I heard her. "Don't be so dramatic," she laughed. "You're fine." Laughter rippled behind her. The kind of laughter people do when they don't know where the line is. Or worse, they do. I clung to the edge of the dock. No one offered a hand. I pulled myself out alone, coughing lake water, hair dripping, shirt clinging to my skin. My knees scraped against the wood, but I didn't wince. I didn't speak. One of the younger cousins, 16 maybe, held up his phone. "Already at 52 likes," he grinned. "Lake drama queen." I didn't even look at him. Back on the lawn, no one stopped eating. No one said sorry. My mother poured another glass of lemonade. Garrick passed Verena a skewer of shrimp, saying, "Still got that arm strength, huh?" I sat on the stone wall near the garden, water pooling around my shoes. Verena flipped burgers like nothing had happened. Her white dress stayed dry. My hands trembled slightly, but I pressed them into my thighs. They didn't just let me fall. They never planned to catch me. By nightfall, the sky turned a bruised navy. I slipped into the bedroom at the back of the house, the one they still called the spare, even though it used to be mine. I closed the door softly behind me. No footsteps followed. I pulled out the tote and set it on the desk by the window. The old wood still bore faint rings from my father's coffee mugs. I reached in and pulled out the small flash drive. The metal was cool against my fingers. I had found it 2 months ago, tucked inside a music box of his I was supposed to donate. I hadn't looked yet, but tonight the silence felt different. Not like surrender, more like preparation. I plugged it into my laptop, but didn't click anything yet. That crack? It started with a question I hadn't asked in years. I didn't sleep much, not because of the lake. That part had already settled into something dense and cold inside my chest, like a stone I wasn't planning to remove anytime soon. It was everything else, the laughter afterward, the way my wet footprints dried before anyone noticed I was missing. By morning, the house was full of movement again. Someone had started the coffee too early, so it sat bitter and lukewarm by the time I poured myself a cup. I took it out to the garden table near the stone path, still in the same jeans I'd dried overnight on the chair. The others were already gathered, as if yesterday had been nothing more than a picnic. Verena sat at the far end, scrolling her phone with surgical efficiency. Her sunglasses were too large for her face, like always, but she wore them like armor. Garrick was talking about the price of lumber, again. My mother asked if anyone had seen the paper. No one mentioned the lake, or the laughter, or the clip. Verena finally looked up. "Did you sleep all right?" she asked, sipping orange juice like she wasn't pretending. "Sure," I said, like a rock at the bottom of the bay. No one responded. Garrick chuckled and leaned back. "You've always been so expressive." One of the nephews made flailing motions with his arms and mimicked me coughing. "Help! I'm dying in 3 feet of water!" More laughter. Not the kind that invites you in, but the kind that locks the door behind you. I looked down at my coffee and stirred it. Wrote a quick line in the margins of a napkin I kept in my pocket. Even drowning is dramatic, when it doesn't fit the narrative. They moved on to brunch plans. Verena suggested the bistro downtown, the one with the goat cheese frittatas. I nodded, still invisible. That was when someone, Aunt Marilyn I think, said, "It was just so inspiring how Verena won that art scholarship years ago. Full ride, right?" Verena smiled modestly. "It was competitive, but yeah, full scholarship. I guess they liked what they saw." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My body already knew how to swallow heat without showing smoke. What Marilyn didn't know, what nobody remembered, was that the scholarship had been mine first. I had applied quietly, on a whim. My father had helped me prep the portfolio. He even drove me to the interview. The letter came in May. Acceptance, full coverage, room and board. It sat on my desk for 2 days. Then, Verena found it. She had been rejected by the same program. Her eyes were red. Her voice was flat when she said, "You weren't even planning to go. You hate crowds. You said that." And I did. I really did. So I nodded. She cried in the living room while I typed the email declining the offer. "I just want her to have a shot," I told Dad. He watched me closely. "You sure?" he asked. "She needs it more," I lied. No one ever talked about that again. Except my memory. My memory keeps receipts. After brunch, I stepped away and opened my laptop in the den. The Wi-Fi was spotty, but I didn't need much. Just an old folder, buried in the email account I barely used anymore. I clicked through the archived drafts and found it. Subject line, Scholarship Decline, Murray Lowell. Attached, Portfolio, Final.pdf. I scrolled through the list of attachments. There it was. My name on every slide, my father's notes in the margins. Every brushstroke, every caption. Mine. I leaned back and stared at the screen. They erased me from the story and replaced it with someone easier to praise. Someone who looked better in a press release. I closed the laptop, but not before downloading a copy. I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. But I needed to remind myself that I had existed here, even if they had all agreed not to remember it. Out on the porch, they were arguing over where to eat. "Verena should pick," my mother said. "She always knows the good places." "Is that what we're calling it now?" I mumbled. No one heard. Later that afternoon, I watched as Verena redirected every conversation to herself. When someone mentioned how the garden had bloomed this year, she smiled and said, "Yes, I told Mom we needed more hydrangeas." She hadn't. When someone asked about the mortgage, Garrick answered for her. When someone asked me about the house, Verena cut in with, "Oh, Murray just likes to stay low-key. Nothing to worry about." I realized something as I watched them. This family didn't need a villain. They just needed a void they could pour their own version of me into. One they could edit. One that didn't remember. But I remembered. That night, when the sky turned soft again, I opened my laptop one more time. I searched for the original acceptance email. There it was, still marked unread. When people erase you long enough, you start leaving traces where they least expect. I stayed in my room most of the morning. Outside, the house came alive again. Porch doors sliding open, flip-flops smacking against the deck, someone tapping on a phone keyboard like they were solving a crisis that wouldn't matter in an hour. The smell of toast drifted in from the hallway. I let it pass. Eventually, I slipped on a fresh shirt and moved through the kitchen for coffee. Verena was at the dining table, setting down placemats with the kind of purpose that was never about hospitality, just performance. Garrick was folding a stack of papers nearby, the edge of his mouth pulled up in something that passed for a smirk. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Verena didn't look up. "Just a light lunch," she said. "Some of us thought it'd be a good time to go over Dad's things. Legacy stuff. It's nothing formal." She laid down another placemat, then paused as if remembering something trivial. "We figured you wouldn't want to get into all that." It wasn't a question. I poured my coffee. The silence between us felt loud, like something scraping underneath the floorboards. About 20 minutes later, I saw Garrick on the side porch, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a courtroom deposition. "You heading to that estate meeting thing?" I asked. He blinked. "Yeah. I mean, you're coming, right?" I shook my head once. "Didn't know I was invited." He hesitated. "Oh, I just figured you'd be in the loop." I didn't bother correcting him. Instead, I wandered to the garden on the far side of the house. Found the pot I'd planted 5 years ago. The rosemary had turned woody and gray. I watered it anyway, even though I knew better. From across the patio, I could hear voices rising. Verena's mostly, clipped and controlled, assigning chairs, distributing folders. She'd always had a knack for sounding like she was managing something bigger than herself, like we should be grateful to orbit her. I sat with my back against the stone wall, watching a small bird peck at the ground. Then I heard it, her voice through the cracked kitchen window. "With everything Mireille's been through," she said, casual like a weather report, "we just thought it might be better if she didn't have to deal with this kind of stress." A pause. "You know, with her history, financial stuff gets complicated." My stomach turned. I didn't move. She was using my own story against me. The months I'd spent in therapy after Dad died. The prescription I'd briefly taken to help with sleep. The time I'd pulled back from social media just to catch my breath. Twisted now into a narrative that painted me as unstable. No one pushed back. Not Garrick. Not my mother. Just the soft sound of coffee being stirred, and the clink of silverware being arranged. Later, I saw my cousin Lila pass by with a notebook. She saw me but didn't stop. Just gave a polite nod, like I was someone's friend from church she barely remembered. This wasn't an oversight, it was a design. They weren't building walls, they were turning their backs. It occurred to me then that they didn't see themselves as excluding me. In their version, I had removed myself. Too quiet, too private, too difficult to place. But they still wanted my silence dressed up as consent. I thought back to something Dad once whispered to me on a winter night when Verena was off at college, and I was trying to decide whether to apply to a residency in New Mexico. "Don't let them write over your part, Mireille," he said, pressing a hot mug into my hands. "Even if they speak louder, even if they publish it first." I hadn't thought of that night in years, but here they were, rewriting anyway. I stood. The room was full when I stepped in. Garrick had taken the end of the table, flanked by Verena and our mother. The rest of them, cousins, in-laws, polite sympathizers, sat in a half-circle, leafing through documents like they were at a planning committee. Everything stopped when I walked in. Verena's voice caught mid-sentence. We were just... I walked to the nearest empty chair and rested my hands on the back. If I'm not part of this legacy, I said quietly, then don't use my name to decorate it. They looked at me like I'd dropped something heavy in the center of the table. Maybe I had. No one followed me when I left that room. Not a single footstep echoed behind mine. I didn't expect them to. That kind of silence doesn't come from surprise. It comes from habit. They were used to letting me walk away. I moved upstairs, the walls narrowing around me like a funnel. The second floor still smelled like old lemon polish and dust, like the memory of a home rather than the thing itself. I passed the guest room, my room, once upon a time, and paused in front of the study. It was still locked. Of course it was. That door had stayed closed since the funeral. Verena said it was to preserve Dad's space. I knew better. Locked doors always served the person holding the key, not the one missing what's inside. Down the hall, I heard movement. Light steps. Verena appeared at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, wearing the silver cuff bracelet. My bracelet. The one Dad gave me for my 35th birthday. I remembered the way he handed it over in a little velvet pouch. No card, no fuss. He said, "You get this because you stayed." And here she was, wearing it like she'd forgotten. Or worse, decided it didn't matter. She didn't even glance at me as she walked by. Just tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and muttered something about checking the guest count for Sunday's brunch. I didn't say anything. My fingers curled just slightly. Not from anger, but recognition. That was always her trick. Don't take what isn't yours. Just act like it always was. I turned into the hallway where the family photo wall used to be. But it wasn't the same anymore. The frames had been updated, sleeker, all black and white prints now. Clean, curated, and incomplete. My baby photos? Gone. The snapshot of Dad and me fishing on the dock the summer I turned 12? Replaced with Verena shaking hands with a city councilman at a ribbon cutting. A blown-up print of her receiving that scholarship, smile full of polished charm, now hung above the mantel like a centerpiece. It wasn't even yours to hang, I whispered. The walls didn't answer. They never did. Back in the hallway, my phone buzzed. A notification from Sterling. I stepped into the corner by the linen closet to read it in private. Subject line: Most recent version of will, per your request. There was a PDF attachment. The message itself was short. Mireille, this is the latest executed version we found in probate files. You are no longer listed as secondary beneficiary. No physical signature, only a verbal amendment recorded during a clarifying call initiated by Verena. Let me know if you want to discuss. S. I opened the file. The words felt mechanical on the screen. Line items, allocation notes, charitable deductions. But the absence hit like a stone. My name wasn't there. Not once. Not even in the miscellaneous items section. I had been erased by the same hand that had smiled at me in the kitchen that morning. I didn't delete the email. I didn't forward it either. I just stared at the screen until the text stopped moving and my vision settled. That bracelet. The photos. The estate. None of it had been accidental. I thought back to the months after Dad's stroke. He'd started to forget dates, repeat stories, mix up timelines. That's when Verena swooped in, said she'd handle the paperwork so I could just focus on Dad. I had believed her. Now I saw it clearly. That's when the edits began. Quiet, clean, almost invisible. I walked slowly to the end of the hall, where his bookcases lined the study wall. I tapped the bottom shelf twice. It was a thing we used to do. Just a silly signal between us when I was a kid. 2 taps means it's still ours, he'd say, usually about some tool or book Verena wanted to claim. The panel shifted with a soft click. Dust floated in the thin slice of light that broke through. My hand slid behind the shelf, fingers grazing cardboard. I pulled out a worn envelope. No stamps, no return address, just my name, in my father's handwriting. Familiar, shaky at the edges, but his. I didn't need to open it to know it mattered, but I opened it anyway. The paper inside the envelope was folded 3 times, each crease worn down like it had been opened and refolded many times. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, a little more fragile than I remembered, but still deliberate. The words were simple. He wasn't one for sentiment, but the final line echoed in my ears long after I'd closed the envelope. "You are the root of this," he'd written. "Let no one take credit for what you grew." I carried that with me the next day as I stepped through the front entrance of the Asheville Museum. The building was bright and polished, walls washed in soft light, the hum of low conversation bouncing off the stone floors. A large banner hung over the welcome desk. Local Legacy Series celebrating Riverlight. I hadn't been invited. I knew about the event only because an old friend from the co-op had texted me a link. Verena had said nothing, of course. Not a word at dinner, not a whisper during her estate meeting. Nothing. The receptionist looked up from her laptop. "Oh, we weren't expecting, but go ahead in." I gave a small nod, too tired to fake a smile. Inside the main exhibit hall, guests milled around the open space, sipping Prosecco from thin plastic flutes. I scanned the room and saw Verena across the floor, dressed in a tailored navy dress and low heels. Her hair was pinned neatly, lipstick precise. She was greeting donors like they were lifelong friends. No sign of discomfort, no indication of shame. My eyes found the mural first, Riverlight. The installation curved along the far wall, a flow of color and light that still carried the ache I remembered pouring into it. Each stroke was mine. I had painted through grief, turning memory into movement, loss into something warm. But the plaque beneath it stopped me cold. Commission design by Verena Lowell. A laugh almost escaped me, low, bitter. My legs carried me forward, but the rest of me felt stuck in some invisible cement. There, under the name of the woman who hadn't lifted a brush, was my father's favorite quote etched in brass. "What roots remain still hold the soil." It wasn't hers to use. None of it was. I leaned closer, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. The texture in the paint confirmed what I already knew. The digital recreation had been based on my original sketches. My style wasn't something you could fake. It was layered in how the strokes leaned into each other, how the color deepened in the corners. You could only know that if you'd made it. And I had. 10 years ago, I had saved those files on an old hard drive. Verena had borrowed it, said she needed to back up Dad's records during the cleanup after the funeral. I hadn't thought twice. Until now. The Q&A portion began 20 minutes later. Verena stood at the front of the room like a curator, poised and ready. "Riverlight," she began, "was conceived as a love letter to this city, and to our father. It represents continuity, resilience, beauty from brokenness." She thanked the museum for recognizing her work. She called it a labor of love. No one questioned it. They clapped. I didn't. I stepped forward as the last applause faded. "Excuse me," I said calmly, my voice carrying just enough weight to hush the chatter. Verena's smile faltered. "Oh, Mireille," she said. "Didn't expect you to be here." "I know," I replied. "You didn't invite me." A few people shifted in their seats. I walked to the front, not hurried, not hesitant. I turned to face the room, not her. The original concept of Riverlight came from a time in my life when I had nothing else but a brush and a memory. It was born from the ache of watching my father disappear day by day, and every curve, every layer, every light wash on that wall, I pointed to the mural, was mine. Silence. Tense, brittle. Verena gave a short laugh. Mireille's always had a vivid imagination. I turned to her. And you've always had a habit of calling truth a tantrum when it doesn't serve you. Her smile cracked. The curator stood awkwardly nearby, looking from her to me and back again. Someone from the second row whispered, "Is she serious?" I turned back to the audience. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to reclaim what was never supposed to be taken. That mural isn't a collaboration. It's not a family project. It's not a tribute Verena helped design. It's a piece of me, my grief, my art, my legacy. Verena opened her mouth to respond, but found nothing waiting there. I walked away. Near the hallway, a woman with silver-streaked hair leaned in as I passed. "You should have been the keynote speaker," she said, just loud enough for Verena to hear. I stopped at the far end of the room and turned one last time to face the mural. This time, I didn't see it as something stolen. I saw it as something returned. After the art gala, I didn't return to the lake house right away. I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like polished lies. I sat in my car outside the community center for a long time, watching the porch lights blink on across the street, one by one, as if the world was quietly folding into itself. It was late when I finally drove over to the memorial dinner. The parking lot was already full, the last stragglers slipping inside with floral arrangements and bottles of wine. I wasn't early, I wasn't late, I was deliberate. Inside, the room hummed with the familiar notes of small-town performance. Name tags stuck on blouses, cheap folding chairs draped in fabric, ambient jazz, humming low from speakers in the ceiling. A slideshow flickered to life on the projector as I took my seat at the back, unnoticed. The first slide came up. In loving memory of Augustus Lowell. Then in gold cursive, with gratitude to the family, V. Lowell and guests, not V and M. Lowell, just her. The pictures began. Dad holding a baby, me, though the caption didn't say it. Then Dad at the cabin, fishing, again with me, my face blurred in the sunlight, and no label to mark it. Then came my artwork, my sketches, the ones he framed himself and hung in his den. They now flashed across the screen with a single tag in the corner. Artwork courtesy of the Lowell family. Not mine, just family, which apparently didn't include me. Someone 2 rows ahead leaned over and whispered, "Didn't Mireille do that one?" Verena, already standing by the podium, answered before I could. "Oh, those were family projects. Collaborative. Dad was big on teamwork." Liar. She clicked to the next image, a photo of her presenting a grant at City Hall, and I realized, with something cold and bitter in my spine, that this slideshow wasn't about Dad at all. It was a eulogy for her version of our history. Next came the reading. Verena opened a slim, hardbound book and began, her voice soft and reverent. These pages are excerpts from a legacy memoir, compiled from Dad's journals and our shared memories. Shared? She read a passage about planting tomatoes in the backyard. I'd written that in my own notebook after a summer we spent together before her first divorce. I remembered the exact phrasing, the way dirt under your nails made grief quieter. She read it word for word, as if she'd lived it. Then came a story about a little girl who used to bring their father pressed violets in an old poetry book. "My little niece," Verena said. She was always so gentle, quiet, like a breeze more than a person. A niece. I stared at the page of the program booklet in my lap. My name was nowhere. Not in the artist acknowledgments. Not in the contributor notes. Not even listed among surviving family. I wasn't just overlooked, I had been redacted. The final straw didn't snap. It dissolved, slow and soundless, like sugar in warm tea. I stood. The room wasn't packed, but it was full enough. Heads turned, forks paused mid-air. I walked calmly toward the front, my shoes quiet on the carpet. Verena looked up, a flicker of something in her eyes. Confusion, maybe, or fear. I didn't ask for the microphone. I didn't need it. "My name," I said clearly, "is Mireille." Not a niece. Not a family guest. I'm his daughter. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. I held up the program booklet. I wrote these words, I said. The ones about the tomatoes. The pressed violets. The quiet. Verena stepped forward. Mireille, I think you're misremembering. I think you're mistaking silence for consent, I said, cutting her off. I don't need to be written in. I've already been living it. She went still. Her hands twitched at her sides, unsure whether to defend or deflect. For a long second, no one moved. Then, from the far corner, my Uncle James clapped once. Just once. But it was enough. We left the memorial dinner in silence. Even Garrick, who usually couldn't resist cracking a half-hearted joke or checking his phone every 3 minutes, kept his mouth shut. My mother walked stiffly ahead, clutching her purse like it was a fragile urn. I followed a few paces behind, not because I wanted space, but because I already had it. That's what happens when people cut you out. Eventually, you don't walk beside them anymore. You don't walk behind either. You just stop asking where the path is. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling DeWitt's office 5 minutes early. I waited outside until the clock struck exactly 9. Then I stepped inside. The office was quiet, with high ceilings and tall windows that made even the morning light feel polite. Sterling stood to greet me with a firm nod, not overdone. Morning, Mireille. Thank you for doing this, I said. He motioned toward a long oak table in the conference room. Everyone's just about settled. Inside, Verena sat at the far end, next to Garrick. My mother was beside her, lips pressed so tightly they'd gone pale. On the other side of the room sat one of Dad's longtime friends, Alan Pierce, a former neighbor and semi-retired CPA who'd been invited as a neutral witness. I took the seat directly across from Verena. She didn't look up. Sterling began with routine pleasantries, flipping open a slim file folder and clearing his throat. Before we move into any updated documents, I was asked by Mireille to begin today's meeting with something she provided last week, a file found among her father's possessions. For full transparency, I've reviewed the contents and verified the timestamp and source. Verena shifted. Garrick glanced at her. Sterling turned the monitor toward the room and clicked play. The screen flickered, then lit up with the face of my father. Tired, older, but unmistakably clear-eyed. He sat at his desk, the same one Verena had since cleared of everything but her version of events. If anything happens, he began, and the paperwork gets fuzzy, I need you to remember this. His voice had that quiet authority he always carried. Not showy, but firm. Mireille built the mural, all of it. The sketches, the color theory, the first brushstroke to the last. Verena helped set up the scaffolding, but she didn't paint a thing. He paused, took a breath. She also gave up the art scholarship for her sister, told me not to tell anyone, said Verena needed it more. That's just who she is. The room went still. Sterling folded his hands. This was recorded 1 month before Mr. Lowell's passing. The metadata confirms the file has not been altered. Verena leaned forward. He was taking pain meds at the time. That could have affected his clarity. Sterling didn't flinch. He speaks coherently, references dates accurately, and uses language consistent with his prior statements. From a legal standpoint, the recording holds. Garrick shifted in his seat and looked away. My mother stared down at her lap, her fingers gripping the edge of her scarf. Before anyone could speak again, Sterling opened another file. This time, it was a hard copy, bound, initialed, notarized. This, he said, is the original 2021 version of Augustus Lowell's will. In it, Mireille is listed as co-beneficiary to all intellectual property, creative holdings, and personal effects tied to the family home. He looked at Verena. The revised version submitted in 2022 was never officially filed. No witness signatures. No confirmation of verbal consent beyond a handwritten note from Verena herself. He let the silence settle. In other words, he concluded, the 2021 will stands. Verena's lips parted, then closed again. Her throat moved like she was about to swallow something too large. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I just watched her slowly realize that the narrative had slipped out of her hands. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. She looked at me, finally, not with anger, not even with guilt, just the slack, stunned face of someone who'd never planned for her lie to be challenged in broad daylight. I stood. No one stopped me. As I reached the door, I heard her behind me, soft but sharp. You planned this. I paused, turned just enough to meet her eyes. No, I said. I just stopped hiding. You wrote your downfall yourself. Then I walked out and let the air close behind me. The door to the law office clicked shut behind me, but the silence followed me out like a shadow. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated, just still. By noon, I was standing at the reception desk of Women Against Inherited Silence. Naomi met me in the entryway, clipboard in hand, her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. You sure? She asked, not softly, but kindly. I nodded once. Yes. She led me into a small conference room tucked in the back of the building. The space smelled like lavender and clean paper. Sunlight cut across the table. The documents were already laid out, neatly stacked beside a mug that read, Protect Her Voice. Naomi slid the folder toward me. It's all here. Donation of full amount, no contingencies, no nameplate, no board seat. Just use it, I said, for women who've had to give up more than they should have. She gave me a look that didn't require words. We weren't friends, not really, but she understood. That was enough. I signed the papers, page by page. $340,000. The university fund Verena had once laughed about, assuming it was hers by default. The final signature pressed into the page like a full stop at the end of a chapter I no longer needed to reread. Naomi didn't thank me. She just said, You did this for yourself. That's enough. I drove back to the house in silence. No music, just the hum of the tires and the slow realization that I didn't feel hollow. I felt vacant, maybe, but on purpose, like something had been cleared out. At the lake house, I parked by the shed and let myself in through the side door. The main living room was empty, but I heard voices faintly in the distance. Probably Verena and Garrick arguing over optics. Or dinner. Or both. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine. Instead, I walked into Dad's old study, opened the second drawer of his desk, and retrieved what I came for. 2 sketchbooks, a framed photo of us from the Riverlight build, and his flannel shirt. That was it. No heirlooms, no trinkets. I didn't want the lamp they'd fight over or the china they pretended was antique. I took only what mattered. What had meaning before it had market value. As I zipped my bag, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I checked it on the back porch, sitting on the steps with the flannel draped across my shoulders. The message was brief. Hey, it's Lauren. I know we haven't talked in a while. I found out Verena told you I didn't want to stay in touch. That wasn't true. I'm sorry for believing her. I guess I didn't want to know the truth back then. Anyway, if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I saved the message. Didn't call back. I didn't need to fix anything. Not anymore. I needed space, and now I had it. The sun had started to lean west by the time I made one last walk through the house. I moved slowly, not out of sentiment, but out of respect. This place had held my silence for too long. It deserved to know I was leaving it behind. In the kitchen, I took a blank sheet of notepaper from the drawer. I wrote, I am not angry, I am finished. You'll feel this absence more than my presence ever cost. I folded it once, set it by the keys, and placed them both on the counter. When I stepped outside, I closed the door gently. Not slamming it, just letting it seal. And there he was. Garrick stood at the far end of the driveway, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't say a word, just watched. I nodded once, then turned, and kept walking. 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of birds, not voices. The window beside my bed at Silver Pines overlooked a row of lavender bushes just starting to bloom. The scent drifted in with the breeze, warm and clean. I wrapped my hands around a ceramic mug of black coffee and walked barefoot out to the small garden path that circled the residency's inner courtyard. No one here asked me where I'd been. No one called me dramatic. No one called me anything at all. And it was perfect. That morning, after watering the seedlings I'd helped plant the week before, I stopped by the front desk to check for mail. There was an envelope addressed to me in thick black pen, forwarded from Garrick's office. No return address. No sender name. Inside was a folded sheet of letterhead from a real estate law firm I didn't recognize, and tucked behind it, a second page. Handwritten. Familiar cursive. It was Verina's handwriting. The letter wasn't dated. It had never been sent. I sat on the bench near the rose trellis and read. "I know you'll never see this," it began. "But if you do, I want you to understand it was never about the mural, or the scholarship, or even Dad. It was about him, Garrick. The way he looked at you. The way he listened when you spoke, even when you didn't mean to be interesting." My breath caught, not because I was shocked, but because it explained more than anything she'd ever said aloud. "You didn't steal anything from me," she wrote. "You just existed. And that was enough to make me invisible in a house where I used to control every room." She had underlined that sentence. I folded the page slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it in the drawer of my writing desk. Not to save, just to keep it from the wind. Later that afternoon, Naomi stopped by during her outreach rounds. She leaned on the fence beside the community herb garden. "Verina's pulled out of 3 events," she said casually, like reading a weather report. "People talk. Donors are backing off." I raised an eyebrow. "Did she go on damage control?" "She tried," Naomi said, "but you can't spin a legacy built on other people's work, especially not when the original author starts telling her side." I didn't feel smug. I felt still. The mural at the local school had been quietly removed. The scholarship fund bearing Verina's name had been put on hold, pending audit. There were no scandals, no lawsuits, just the slow quieting of someone used to the sound of her own applause. That evening, I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote one more letter, my own this time. "You didn't hate me because I took anything," I wrote. "You hated me because I never asked you for permission to be." I signed it but didn't seal it. Didn't send it. Instead, I tore it into wide strips, carried them to the compost pile by the edge of the garden, and gently folded them into the soil. A resident I'd met only once passed by with a trowel and paused. "Planting something?" "Just lavender and sage," I said. "Is that for memory or forgiveness?" "Neither," I replied. "It's for space." The next morning, I sat beneath the arbor, with my sketchpad open on my lap. I didn't draw Riverlight. I didn't draw the lake or the house or the people who'd taught me what silence could cost. I drew light, and water, and a woman, alone, whole, facing forward. She had no label, no title, no signature, just breath.